everybody and welcome back to mbavtober, where I attempt to make a new video for every week of the month of October about My Babysitter's Vampire. And today's video is going to be about Ethan Morgan. I don't remember if I hinted at this in my previous week's video about Erica or not. That recording session was a literal nightmare, and it caused a bunch of delays, as well as the Rory video. So, we're kind of a little bit off schedule, but we're still kind of going with the flow. Also, I'm wearing a lot of loud jewelry today, so I hope that doesn't... hope that's not too obvious or annoying. So Ethan Morgan is the de facto leader of the Fang Gang. He is essentially the main character of the series. We follow him in his journey the most, which is why it might feel a little bit difficult to make an entire video on him. At least that's how I felt at the very beginning. Because in a lot of ways, he is supposed to be a sort of audience surrogate. So he fills the role of the audience member themselves. And a problem with that is that they can end up just amplifying very generic, personality traits. But I would say that Ethan is a pretty well-developed character and does have a really interesting arc throughout the series. I said that about every character, though. I bet I've said that exact sentence in every single fucking video I've made so far. I also think that his character does represent the way that the series was attempting to or trying to portray its characters within the context of action-adventure TV shows at the time. Because even though it's like a vampire paranormal story, it is still, in a sense, in tone and in framing, leaning more towards the, teen boy action-adventure TV show genre. Or children's horror fest, It's more Goosebumps than it is Vampire Diaries, is what I'm trying to say. Hell, even more Power Rangers than Vampire Diaries, even. So within that context, I feel like characters and their arcs are supposed to fall under specific sort of formulas, and I would argue that mbav directly either spoofs that or just outright ignores that. In my video about Benny, I had talked about how essentially the show self-proclaimed itself to be a spoof of classic schlocky horror movies. That is most seen in the villain characters specifically, and how they basically represent over-exaggerated personas of classic horror villains. Like the creature feature of the rogue alligator, monster creature, but it lives in a toilet at a high school. Or the evil possessed car, but it's also a vampire, right? That's where the spoof comes in. But I would also say that it's emblematic specifically in the way that the sort of protagonist action hero that is Ethan is a spoof, if that makes sense. I think Ethan is a very earnest version of a sort of spoof of the classic action main character hero of 1980s and 1990s action movies specifically. And this is shown through his relationships, emotional struggles, and specifically homoerotic relationships with one specific person. We'll talk about it. I would argue that all of these things are present within the classic 1980s action movie, which I would say the creators of these shows were heavily inspired by. But it is heightened to an intense degree and done intentionally, and I think that's where the spoof comes into play for Ethan Morgan specifically. So yeah, we're gonna dive straight into it. If you all are interested, keep watching. Like and subscribe. I haven't said like or subscribe in any of these videos, and apparently I'm supposed to be doing that. So like and subscribe. While I'm on my promo bullshit, go buy my merch. Oh look, my autofocus is actually working on this camera. At least I think it is. Yeah. Look at this cool bracelet. Don't you want this cool, awesome bracelet? This specific top one. Not my Zeke and Luther one, or my effervescent snail bracelet. Don't you want this cool, awesome, eclectic candy charm bracelet? You can get it at my store. I've also been saying the URL wrong in every single video, which is insane. It is comicbookddr.myshopify.com. You'd think I'd know my own URL. Also, there's been a delay with the podcast episodes. I'm so sorry. This month has been absolutely chaotic. I mean, every mbavtober that I've done, which this is technically the second year I've done it. The first year I did it, it was also chaotic. But this year's been even more, because I've been a bit distracted, to say the least. But that doesn't matter. On to the video. I forgot to mention this in the video, but I was specifically very inspired by a video that Renegade Cut released in 2019 talking about queer theory and masculine action movies of the 80s and 90s. So I highly recommend you check out that video. I tried to not just outright copy it. I also read a chapter from the book From Mouse to Mermaid, The Politics of Film, Gender, and Culture, specifically Chapter 10, The Curse of Masculinity, Disney's Beauty and the Beast by Susan Jeffords. So I'll be referencing that occasionally. Sorry I sound so crazy. It's really late at night. Is anyone gonna take me seriously when I'm in Ryan Ross cosplay? I mean, I wanted to do like a Halloween costume at least for one of these videos, but like I couldn't commit. And then the next video we're gonna make is gonna be kind of serious, so I didn't think it would be the time for a lighthearted costume. So I chose this one. But like, I don't know if this was the vibe or not. So this video is going to be a little bit similar to my queer implications of My Babysitter's a Vampire video. Yo, autofocus. Hello? Hello? In the sense that I'm going to be applying a very, surface level, more lighthearted angle of queer theory to My Babysitter's a Vampire. I didn't want to get into the whole thing behind queer theory because that is such a big topic that I would love for it to be its own video. Maybe next year for mbavtober, I'll do a whole queer theory mbav video, even though technically I kind of did that already, but that was more with like the relationships and stuff and the fan dynamic. But what queer theory can be described as, to put it simply, it's a way of taking an alternative look at pieces of media that is not the inherently heteronormative and patriarchal view that is like the standard way to view any piece of movie or text at all. I pretty much already read mbav this way when I bothered to analyze the queer implications of all of the characters. And I want to do that more specifically with Ethan, and go more in depth about Ethan as a character, because I think that this enlightens a lot about the show creator's intention, I guess, and also why he's such a beloved character, because I love Ethan. He's one of the best characters in the whole show. So his social presentation is a huge part of how masculinity is defined within him, I guess you could say. Insecurity with one's masculinity is a pretty common theme for at least Ethan and Benny specifically. I talked about how that can manifest in somewhat toxic ways with Benny's video, so go check that out. But with Ethan, I would argue he represents elements of masculinity that are positive and, a good thing to see replicated among young people. And whether or not that matters is up for your personal decision. I say it does, but for a lot of people it doesn't, which is why they got mad at me for my Benny video. Which, fair enough, everyone's entitled to their opinions. But he does hold some positive masculine traits. Specifically, he's a great leader and he's very protective of the people he cares about, which in our society, because we live in a society, is seen as a masculine trait. And it's something that he does well as being smart, of having a lot of knowledge and being extremely aware of his context and his surroundings. Of course, his second sight is a big part of that, which his superpowers, again, a whole other video. mbavtober 2026, we already got the whole schedule planned out. His second sight gives him the ability to literally see things that other people can't see, and he gets these premonitions which cause him to be able to lead the group in, solving the problem. And he does so with compassion and care. He's not an aggressive character. He's a very soft, well-meaning character. This is one element of his character that I think he tries to hide or kind of shrink away from, because it's not traditionally understood as being like the proper masculine thing to be. I would never describe Ethan as shy. We had a whole rant on this on our podcast like 3 years ago, because it's been that long since we started the podcast, which blows my mind. But on our podcast, I think when we were talking about the movie specifically, we talked about how Ethan is not necessarily shy. He's not afraid to talk to people or go up in front of class or do things that, traditionally shy people would probably struggle with. But he is reserved. He's a very reserved person. He's not for, just like out front showing intensity like Benny is. And I think a lot of it has to do with his self-esteem. He is quite an insecure character. He's afraid of seeming a certain way, if you know what I mean. Most people's, and especially characters within shows, especially the classic action hero of the 1980s and 1990s, their way of proving their masculinity is to disavow whatever is considered by society to be the anti-masculine. He disavows his friends talking about nerdy stuff in the hallway of fear of getting beaten up.
He's a huge, awesome robot. All you have to do is yank on the warp engine nacelles.
Okay, that's like saying a dude could fight a boat.
Guys, just... can't we do this in a girl-free zone?
Showing passion is like essentially the opposite of being stoic, and I feel like being stoic and, you know, not being super animated is weirdly something that is seen as anti-masculine. Like, let guys have fun, maybe. That's not just like punching things. I mean, having fun punching things is great too, you know, as long as it's not like a human being. Read Fight Club is what I'm trying to say. And of course, getting beaten up by jocks in itself is a disavowal of them as the anti-masculine by the masculine standard doing the beating up.
Hey, we'll miss the status that team got us, though.
I don't know. He will still have the status. Or maybe not. That's okay, guys. I'm good. I'm good.
But as the show goes on, he is supposed to, at least, learn to embrace his importance as a leader and the importance he fulfills within his society and community as somebody who can help defeat the evils of the world. And he's able to rise the ranks and stand up against the evil foes against them. Of course, you know, that gets cut short because they all die at the end. Sorry, I think that joke is funny. I like it when we say, oh, they all exploded at the end of the show. But, like, that's not actually true. Canonically, we don't know what happened after Stern lucifractored the entire town. Like, we'll never know what happens. So they didn't die, they didn't blow up. I don't give a fuck what stinky-ass Atticus Mitchell said on his Twitter. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And he's an asshole. But yes, the masculine traits that Ethan does exemplify are accredited and praised in the show. Yay! Positive examples of masculinity. I want to dive a little bit more into this whole idea of disavowal, of proving masculinity by disavowing what is considered anti-masculine, because this is a huge thing in 1980s and 1990s action movies. I don't know what else to call these movies, like mid-budget action movies, which automatically dates them to the 80s and 90s because mid-budget movies don't exist anymore. You know, anything that wasn't a Terminator movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Because these movies are by men, starring men, for men, and there's like basically not a single ounce of estrogen present in any of these films, it can be easily assumed that these movies are a bit gay. Because anything that is exclusively by men, starring men, for men, can be read as homoerotic inherently. And I think it's important to analyze when something that is accidentally queer or wasn't meant to have queer subtext. It's important to analyze when audiences recognize that. Because knowing why people see bethan hugging and say that's gay, it says a lot about what we in our society understand as homosocial versus homoerotic. To clarify, homosocial specifically just means platonic friendships between two masculine people, versus homoerotic, which is, you know, taking it to a more sexual connotation. I think there is an intense devaluing of homosocial relationships, aka buds being buds, best friends being best friends. Guys who are friends can't say I love you or hug or nap together in a cage. Okay, that one's a bit weird, but still. They can't do any of those things without being called gay. But obviously there's something wrong with being called gay, right? The beauty of classic movies like Predator is that they get to have it both ways. They get to have this sexually charged man-on-man energy while still no homoing their way through the entire thing, so guys don't feel weird about it. But it's still there, and it sits in your mind. So I think bethan is the best ship in the entire show. I bought this shirt for mbavtober, but I specifically didn't want to wear it in my Benny video, lest I get accused of being a hater and not have anyone listen to what I'm actually trying to say in that video. So I'm wearing it now. God, I better get some good ad revenue back on this because this shirt was way too expensive on Redbubble. And also I had to buy it on Redbubble. Yikes. I got it in black too because obviously I don't own any color, but this was made for a white shirt, so there's just like a weird white border. Anyways. Yeah, so it might be weird to consider Bethan the best ship. I mean, it was the most popular, and the reason why it was the most popular is emblematic of all of the worst traits of 2010s internet fandoms. Don't make me pull out the block list, okay? It's not a fucking game, bitch. But I think that there's something beautiful, something serene even, about the Bethan of it all. Like I said, they're able to no homo their way through the show enough by showing attraction to girls, with Benny in a very negative way, and in Ethan with his very cute, pining, romantic, interest in Sarah. And what's funny about this in a traditional reading of the show is that because these characters like girls canonically, that automatically X's out the possibility of them being queer in any way. According to the creators, whether it's subconscious or not. I think it's mostly unconscious, but like that's the whole point is what I'm saying. Queer theory works to kind of end this assumption that every character inherently is heterosexual, and that just because a character is shown pursuing a heterosexual relationship does not mean that they are heterosexual entirely. Oh, and by the way, saying a character is either fully straight or fully gay is also perpetuating this stereotype by saying that Ethan and Benny only like each other and they would never like girls. Fuck Sarah. That is also perpetuating this same stereotype, okay? Let them like them both. As we famously say in the fandom, Ethan has two hands. He can hold both of their hands. And he literally does in the finale.
Dude, are we having a moment?
That was what I mean by like being emblematic of the worst traits of 2010's internet fandom, specifically on Tumblr. It was like these people would yaoi so hard that they would somehow end up being misogynistic. And it's like, y'all, we've lost the plot. I was gonna take off the shirt now that I'm basically done with the Bethan section, but you know what? Fuck it. It needs to be said more. So to kind of circle back what I was saying earlier about Ethan at the beginning of the series, he is sort of trying to prove himself to be the right and correct version of masculinity within his culture. Being a freshman in high school on his first day, he sees it as a fresh start to like define who he wants to be. And you can see this intense desire within him to not be seen as the other. I think it was Tim Burns specifically who, on the Facebook group page, which I've gone on many rants about, go watch my previous videos if you want to know what the Facebook group page is. It was run by Teletoon, and a lot of the people who worked on the show, including the main showrunner and writers and editors, would respond to people's comments quite often on there. Very crazy and unprecedented. Like, we don't see shit like that anymore these days. I feel like that was very, pioneering for its time. But it was either Mike Kiss or Tim Burns. I can't remember. Mike Kiss was one of the lead writers, so was Tim Burns, and he was technically considered showrunner. I don't think he ever had that title. I think he was actually given the title of executive producer, but he whatever, it doesn't matter. No one cares. One of them said that Ethan was supposed to kind of start out as a character who wanted to fade into the background and not really be seen or perceived. And over time, he grows to understand his importance within the world and to help others. This is what I mean when I say he's not inherently shy. Well, this could be interpreted as being shy at first and growing confidence. It's more of just like fear of being perceived in a specific way that you don't want to be perceived in. So one interesting thing about The Curse of Masculinity as a chapter is that it talks about Kindergarten Cop, which is a very interesting and insane movie, starring classic 80s star Arnold Schwarzenegger, which, before I get into all of that, let me just clarify and define the importance of the mid-budget action movie that was very common in the 1980s. Not only was it an important standard of box office appeal, but I would argue it was very, very influential when it came to people, specifically Gen Xers, creating children's television programming in the 2000s. I feel like a lot of that intense, extreme, quote unquote, energy that was present in a lot of, comic book adaptations and animated TV shows in general was a sentiment that is like very, very present within these classic movies, which makes a lot of sense because the creators were heavily inspired by them, in my opinion. And My Babysitter's Vampire, even though it doesn't seem like it, fits perfectly within that niche of like young boy action adventure TV show. Obviously it's slightly different because it focuses on vampires and it's live action, but it was basically created by the same people and companies that were creating all of those projects as well. So I think it's important to acknowledge that energy and history And that is why I decided to use like that genre more specifically as a reference point for this video rather than like a specific movie or something, because I think there's an importance to the genre itself that is inherent to this series, in my opinion. People can disagree with me. But back to talking about the chapter, which this book was published in 1995. It talks about how what was defined as the proper masculine thing to do had shifted from like the yuppie, I got mine, intense, aggro male to the family man, and how that's present within a movie like Kindergarten Cop, starring someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was in those crazy, intense movies and was now learning the importance of being a family man and decides to no longer be an aggro police officer, but instead a kindergarten teacher. Again, look at the comparison between the first Terminator movie and the second one. In the second one, it has a very similar message of learning that the importance of community and family from a literal robot who does not seemingly have human emotion. I think this sentiment is deeply, deeply present within the character of Ethan Morgan. This is the shift of masculinity, is what we see within Ethan. And I don't think I articulated it properly in the video, which is why I'm talking about it now into my phone microphone at 4 a.m. To directly quote Jeffords, retroactively, the men of the 1980s were being given feelings that were presumably hidden behind their confrontational violence. While 80s action-adventure films gloried in spectacular scenes of destruction, 90s films are telling audiences that these men were actually being self-destructive. And isn't that what I've been saying all along? And what's kind of sad to think about is that, like, when it comes to this representation of men in shows, have we really come all that far? I feel like with Ethan as a character, we've made like one teeny little step of progress from like Arnold Schwarzenegger shooting at things with machine guns and saying you've been pushing too many pencils and doing the arm thing. How does someone even do that? How does someone do a handshake where your muscles look like they're about to explode out of your skin? Crazy stuff. Like from that, where, we're full on saying slurs just to prove that we're not gay, to showing softness and sensitivity and showing love for your close male friend, and that not being seen as inherently weird or bad. Benny can say shit like, but I'm his best friend, to when his grandmother responds with, Sarah's the one you care about the most.
Sarah's the one you want to protect the most.
But I'm his best friend.
To be fair, that moment in and of itself is probably somewhat of an anti-gay joke. And that not have to be followed up with an anti-gay joke immediately after, like it probably would have in the 80s or 90s. To continue quoting Jeffords, at the cost of their personal and family lives, 80s heroes were rescuing armies, corporations, and ancient artifacts. Now they're out to save themselves. But didn't they bring all this loneliness and suffering on themselves? Were they not the ones who picked up the guns and went for the high-powered jobs? Were they not the ones who spent their time at the office or firing range instead of at home? According to these films, not exactly. 90s films had already carved out a space for their heroes that allowed them to always be reacting to some outside force, rather than acting from their own internal needs for violence or action. Reagan was always, quote-unquote, defending the US against Soviet aggression. In each case, it was their jobs, their nations, or their friends who made it necessary to enter into these violent confrontations. It was not, these films conclude, the wishes of the men themselves. This highlights the point that a lot of these action lead main characters were basically placed in the position as the victim, which was how they further justified their violence and brutality, and that in of itself is a problem for reasons that I don't have time to explain further, but I hope you are at least slightly aware of and kind of understand. Something, men are victims of the patriarchy, something. That doesn't mean we shouldn't hold them accountable for still upholding patriarchy. Words, backstory, plot relevance. But I feel like we're still here. We haven't made much progress. Something I really want to highlight throughout this series is that as much as I love the representation that the fandom and all of us have sort of like imbued into My Babysitter's Vampire, I really do think we need to be finding, making, and watching shows that actually have queer people in them. So it's clear that deep emotional bonds that are just platonic between men is seen as not a societal standard, because if it was, then we wouldn't get people shipping characters purely because one of them dies and the other one is sad about it. I feel like that's a common trope in like a lot of these action movies, is like these two guys have a rapport and then one of them dies and the other one is sad that the other one died, and they're like... Also, I'm sorry, can we just talk about all of the phallic imagery that is present in a lot of these movies? The cigar smoking, the fucking way they hold their guns. It's like... it's there is all I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with phallic imagery, okay? I guess the male gaze has a lot to do with this. The masculine gaze, as we all call it, is basically, to horribly simplify it, again, it could have its own video, and many videos have been made on it. The masculine gaze is the concept of the camera, by being controlled mostly by a man, is presuming that the person watching the movie is masculine, and so it is making the film for a masculine audience inherently. And problems arise from this specifically when women are depicted, because usually they're depicted in a misogynistic way, assuming that the audience is that's how they see women, and it is difficult for women themselves to actually understand and appreciate these films because they feel objectified. This concept is why I think so many normal male-on-male relationships get interpreted as gay. Because again, I said it earlier, if the audience is a guy and the film assumes that the audience is a guy and we only see guys... The famous example is the Top Gun volleyball scene. I saw that in theaters. They did a rescreening of it or something like before the new one came out, and so I went to go see it and I was like, dang, this is so gay. What makes it feel so gay is the fact that there's no like audience perspective. We're not given a clue as to who is supposed to be watching this volleyball scene other than just us. So if this scene, because of the toxic understanding of the masculine gaze, is assumed to be made for men or masculine people in specific, and the scene itself is a bunch of sweaty dudes flexing their muscles, it's homoerotic. It can be seen as gay. That's the problem with excluding women so much, is when you're so misogynistic that you end up making yaoi. I would say, and this is one teeny little thing, it's basically nitpicking, but you know, what is my channel if not nitpicking about mbav? One teeny little nitpick that I have about the show is that I think it is made from this perspective. The inherent assumed audience is young boys, which is why the show can feel like the Ethan and Benny show for so much of the series, because they're the characters the audience, which is assumed to be like 11 to 18-year-old men, are supposed to be associating with the most. And that's why the female characters like Erica and Sarah are not as much connected with in that sense, because they're not supposed to be like an audience surrogate character, unlike Ethan or Benny. I could see it now. Kids on the playground saying, who are you, more like Ethan or Benny? God, I hope none of them said Benny. That would be horrible. I think a symptom of this is characters like Sarah having really, like, the intention behind them is to have these really complex and in-depth, like, stories. The most compelling story within the series is Sarah's emotional arc and the struggles specifically that she goes through that are literally debilitating. But they don't get as much focus because we're assuming that audiences cannot inherently relate to a woman's struggles. But that's a discussion for next week. So I'll see you guys on Halloween Day for that video, hopefully. I regret wearing this shirt now. Specifically because I feel like the teacher in that episode Smells Like Trouble, where she wears the Benny shirt and then she X's it out. Like, I'm closer to that teacher's age than I am to any of the mbav characters. So I'm gonna set this shirt on fire now, guys. Bye.
So